Was it a village that you were born in?
What?
Was it a village?
No, it was not a village. In fact, it was a pretty sizable town called Liepāja in Latvian and Libau in German. It played a role in Russia because it was the northernmost ice-free port. Mm. In fact, it was the only ice-free port on the Baltic Sea that they had. Memel was in Germany, and this is a little bit north of Memel. And so it was, and they built in the 19th century a railroad into the Ukraine because the grain export came from the Ukraine to Western Europe, and that was the harbor. Mm-hmm. So it became quite prosperous, and it was, a sizable town, and played for Latvia. It was a big port, and in fact, when Latvia became independent in 1918, a depression set in because they were a port for Russia. Latvia, it was the needs of Latvia weren't that great, Yeah. I mean, they had many 100 million people in Russia. Yeah. Latvia, they had two. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't much of a need. I mean, they didn't need anything, but they had that facility, and they had a military port. I mean, it was a very elaborate installation, which is still there. And they have now, and they had a factory, which in my time was called the Drahtfabrik. The factory of wires. Mm-hmm. And it was very major, and it's still there, and still active. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's now called Metallurgs. Liepājas Metallurgs, the Liba Metallurg, they have a different name, but it's still there. It's a very major. Mm-hmm. Now, when I don't know if you want to listen to it or not. I mean,
we do, absolutely.
When I got there, I'm through some. When I was elected to the American Academy of Arts, to the American Academy, to the National Academy of Sciences, I got a letter from some guy. He said, that one of us should be elected to this. I was born, he said, in the same town as you were. Mm. And I said, given the population figures, that one of us should make it into the academy is pretty remarkable. That two of us, the statistics are beyond belief, I mean, the square of that, which is basically unheard of. And he said, so we must meet, and so we met. And this guy, he was a professor at the University of Chicago, in fact.
Ah.
Yeah.
In what?
His name was in chemistry, I think. And his name was, and his his claim to fame was that he was the one who provided the explanation. See, it's a fact that the surface of the Earth is covered with soot. There's a layer of soot all over the Earth, which is very, I don't know how many inches of soot all over. That when you dig on the Earth, you always find soot. I mean, burned wood. And he offered the explanation. And the explanation was that a meteor about 65 million years ago passed near the Earth, caused huge conflagrations. And the remnants, the soot is the remnants of these conflagrations.
And which wiped out the dinosaurs.
Which wiped out the dinosaurs, exactly. And so that was, and it's his explanation. He's the one who offered the explanation. Anyway, he sent me this note and said, we must meet. So I said, okay, next time I come to Chicago or you come here, we'll meet. So he came here, and we met. He has since retired, and he lives on the West Coast because his children moved there, and so he moved there after. He and his wife lived there. Now, his name is Edward Anders.
Oh.
Anders is the last name. Yeah. Now he. Interestingly, when the Germans came, I'll thought that. It is literally true, and you have to sort of experience it. The Germans actually killed all the Jews. Now, when you say that, so they're Jews and they're different and so on. But in a way, their main difference is that, it's like saying people whose name starts with B or T, or it's an arbitrary classification. These are just people that live in the same house you do and do the same things more or less that you do, and so, and then all of a sudden, all people whose names begin with B get killed. It's sort of.
You can't believe it.
It's kind of hard to grasp it. But that's what they did in both in Riga and in Liba, the town I went to, the places where they were killed. They are in Riga. It's a little forest. And we had difficulty finding it, but also the place in the other town I lived in, which was also had difficulty finding it, but we did find both places. And by the way, the town where they killed the Libau Jews had the Russians had erected a memorial plaque there when the Soviet Union in the 45 said, the Nazis killed Soviet citizens, 45,000 or whatever the number they have here. And the fact that the large majority of them was Jews wasn't indicated, And in fact, they have now built a water purification plant right next to it. And so there is a memorial area there, but it's not very obvious and it doesn't show up in the maps and so on. But the way it was done was that Jews were made to move when the Germans, the war between Russia and Germany started on June 23rd, the longest day of the year, in 1940, 1941. They had some kind of non-aggression pact before that, and then at some point the Germans attacked the Soviet Union. And in the beginning, you may have known that the Germans just moved. There was the resistance of the Russians was practically they were just being beaten the hell out of it. Was being beaten out of them now there, and they didn't stop. The Russians didn't stop the Germans till the Battle of Stalingrad, and that was a year and a half later. So you can imagine they were moving forward and forward. you can also think how big the Soviet Union is, that they moved, but they were, they were still, they were only a third of the way in it. I mean, this gives you a kind of feeling of what kind of country Russia is. I mean, how huge it is, how endless it is, And, the Germans went in there and they were victorious, brilliantly victorious and moving, and it didn't do them any good, I mean, okay. So finally, in the Battle of Stalingrad, they were stopped. And then they were pushed back, in 1943 and 1944, and it took them 2.5 years to be killed. I mean, but that was the high point. I was there. The Stalingrad was the high point of the German advance. Mm-hmm. Okay, anyway. So, of course, Latvia was run over right away, Yeah. And it stayed under German control till the very end, till 1945. So it was a very long period. Now, when they came in, and this was the same in almost everywhere, they made the Jews move. I mean, we'd left.
You'd already left Latvia.
Yeah, we left Latvia in April of 1940. So this is about 1.5 years before all this happened. A little over a year before this happened.
Your family knew had a sense of what was happening, was going to happen.
Maybe not. I mean, I think that the more significant aspect of it was that my father was sort of adventurous. My father's brother, who was his closest friend, and whom he saw every day, we lived not far apart. They used to walk to work together in the morning, he and his brother, so they were very, very close. Wouldn't come. And why wouldn't he come? His wife had started a business, an interior decorating business that was going quite well, and she didn't want to give it up. And, they didn't think it was, okay, so, and I said, so something will happen, we'll take nobody imagined what actually happened. Well, heading into the most, and here's what actually happened. So the first thing that happened was that all people who, on the Latvian passport and the way you're registered by the police, you're registered by nationality. And this is typical in Russia. And this is a Tsarist thing that continues. Everybody is a member of a nationality, and Jews are nationality. They're not religion. Jews is a national. By their standards. So you're a national. You can. So everybody who had in the passports indicated that they were Jews had to move into the ghetto. They had an area in the city which they cleared of all other people, and people moved in there. And then that was in June. And then in December they started liquidating the ghetto. And they basically taking people out and shooting them. That was... So in Riga, the execution area was about 5 miles outside the town. Not very far. I used in a little forest. I remember when I was a kid, I used to go skiing there. You could go cross-country skiing. There was plan, and I'd learned how to ski when I was a kid. And I used to go Saturday on the streetcar. You go out to the end of the line, and then in this forest I'd go ski. And this was this area where we were the skiing area, which they used as an execution area. And people would be marched out there, and they had, in this area where you can now see, there are, there's a monument, In fact, Riga also became people from Germany, Jews from Germany, were transferred to Riga for execution. I mean, they were brought from Germany to Riga, and then they were executed in Riga. Riga was an execution place, and so many German cities have in this memorial there the names of the people from Germany who were, said Dortmund and Hamburg and whatever towns, little different towns in Germany. These people were brought to Riga to be executed, and their signs on the ground were saying here, and so they have this memorial there. And but in this forest where they have the memorial, they also have these sort of rectangular concrete enclosures. They may be 10 feet by 15 or maybe 10 by 20 or something like that. They little enclosures. And apparently that's where they used to put the bodies. There's about 30, 40 of them around it. I didn't count them, but there are many. And right now it's an area where there is this, and there is a memorial, and it's also used as a. It's fairly, the city has grown, and people live there, and they use it as a area to walk, and it's a recreational area, and this is in the midst of it. Anyway, that was. What I'm doing is I'm trying to tell you the ambivalence about the whole thing. In a way, it's a nice, pleasant place, and yet when you think what happened here, it's not so pleasant. But this is why it's still a pleasant place.
So, when you moved, had you started? What languages? You learned Latvian first. Did you also have to learn Russian in school, or
you spoke Russian? I didn't learn Latvian. I didn't learn. I spoke. I went out on the street. The kids spoke Latvian, and I was 5 years old or 6 years old, and I spoke Latvian. You know how it is when you're 5 years old. You don't have to go and learn.
I see, and so you also learned when you were 5 Russian also?
Well, I learned Russian because my aunt's house, they spoke Russian.
I see.
And in my aunt's house, for some reason, my uncle had gone to medical to dental school. He was a dentist. My father's sister's husband, my uncle, he was a dentist, and he'd gone to Russia, so he spoke Russian in his house.
He married a Russian woman?
No, I don't. No, he married my aunt, who's my father's sister. So obviously not. But anyway, in his house they spoke Russian. Mm-hmm. Speaking a language in Latvian is not. It's not like you. It's like you're reacting to somebody. You react different to your mother than you react to your father or to your friend or something. And it happens that the language you react in changes. But that's a secondary fact. It's not a prior. When I was a kid, my mother had to explain to me. I just thought that you spoke different way to different people. You speak different to your grandfather than you speak to your mother, to your friends. And then she said that you speak a different language, and the fact that that was I hadn't noticed that, you know.
When did you start? Did you start going to a university, or when did you start?
Yeah, I started. I went to elementary school.
Right.
You know, I didn't go to university when I was 7 years old.
But
Even brilliant as I am, I didn't go to university when I was 7.
no, but then you left when you were You left about a year and a half. You said before this terrible stuff started.
Okay. I
When
was
did you
born
finish
in 1923.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
I was 17 when 16. I was just under 17 before I came here.
And so you came straight from Latvia to America?
Yeah, we took a train. And,
Oh,
you
I
know,
see.
I mean, it was no problem.
Oh,
We
I
just
didn't
took
know.
a regular. We didn't run away.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was just we went to the station, got on the train, and you know, changed trains, and finally got to America.
So you had to learn English all of a sudden?
Well, I already spoke English.
I see.
Yeah,
Wow. So,
all of us did.
I see. And so,
You know,
when-
not perfectly,
Well.
but fluently enough, so that I went to school. When I got to New York, okay, the person that I knew in New York was some girl that I had gone to camp with, you know, and she was she was American, I think, and her family was from, and they'd come to Latvia for a summer, and so I knew this girl, and a friend of my father's met us at the boat, and he rented some digs for us in Washington Heights, and so happened it was quite near her. Now she was a cousin of a guy who later on became quite well known. His name was Moshe Arns, and he was foreign minister or prime minister. I mean, he was a high official in the Israeli government in the 70s, I think. And so I went to her house, and you know, and she said to me, I mean, I forget. She said, you know, tomorrow. There's nothing to do for you in New York. It's too big. You're overwhelmed here. The best thing I think you should do is go to school with me tomorrow. So I said, okay, 9 o'clock. I'll meet you downstairs and we'll go to school. And, you know, whenever, 8 o'clock or whatever the time was, she came to my house. She lived, you know, 3 doors down from where we lived. And so we walked to George Washington High School in New York City, which I don't know if you, it's up, George Washington is the northernmost city high school. You know, it's the very north end of Manhattan.
So near Harlem, or even
But it's north of Harlem.
North of Harlem.
North of Harlem. It's 193rd Street.
Wow.
You know. So we walked to the school. It's still there. The same building is still there. When you go to Fort Tryon Park, I don't know if you know, there is
I've heard of it. Yeah.
there's an art museum there in Fort Tryon. Okay.
So then, were you a senior then? Was
When
that
I
only
came
1
to
year?
what?
When you were only there at the high school 1 year?
Well, I came. You remember in May.
Oh, I see.
And it was the end of the year, so I stayed 1 year, but it was 3 terms in effect.
Uh-huh.
You know, it was sort of the end of my junior year and the senior year. I did at George Washington.
And then it was time to go to a university, or
Yeah,
where did you go then?
So then I went to City College.
City College.
Again, I could have. I mean, when I sort of think back on my life, is that my choices are always the least. Sort of that require the least action, you know. Sort of, I mean, the minimal moves.
Uh-huh.
So the minimal move, you know, I'm sure I could have gone to Columbia had I tried.
Uh-huh.
And my father wasn't poor. I mean, you know, there was some money in the family, so that
Uh-huh.
it wasn't a question of tuition. Then at Columbia was something like $400 a year,
Yeah.
and it was it wasn't beyond us. But it never occurred to me to pay money to go to university. You know, that never occurred to me.
Yeah.
So since I was going to go where it was for free, so I went to City College. It was perfectly okay. It wasn't a mistake. But I went to City College. It was also close. I could walk there. You know, we lived on 162nd Street in City College, 135th Street, 37th Street.
That's a long walk.
No, come on, from 163rd, that's
30
20
blocks.
Yeah, but in New York, 20 blocks is a mile. It's a
Oh,
mile
so-
and a half. It's
I
less.
see, okay.
It's not. New York blocks are short.
I see,
It's
okay.
20 blocks a mile, so it's less than 2 miles.
I see. And what did you major in?
I started to major in engineering.
What kind of engineering?
I never got that far.
I see.
I mean, I signed up for electrical engineering, but I did very well for my first year. You know, I got A's and B's. You know, my second year, it was very clear that for example, in mathematics, I really didn't understand it. I mean, I knew how to do it. See, I got good grades because I had sort of figured out how to solve problems. But I really didn't understand why you did it. I mean, I don't know if you see what that.
Yeah.
I really didn't understand why you were doing it. But I was sort of skilled at doing it, but I didn't understand what I was doing. In fact, so when I realized that, I said, well, I probably wasn't cut out to be an engineer, but at this point, I was being it was no longer. I mean, I was being drafted.
You got in the army.
In the army, and so but I didn't get drafted for 2 years. I mean, I didn't get called up. Well, Pearl Harbor happened at the end of '41,
Yeah.
and I didn't get called in until '43, about a year and a half after Pearl Harbor. I went in the army.
I didn't know. Where did they send you?
Well, they sent me, you know, different places, and ultimately, they sent me. I was sent to Europe as an interrogator of prisoners of war, and I was on prisoners of war, and I remember being sent on our first assignment, and this was after the Battle of the Bulge, right after the Battle of the Bulge, and the American Army was moving forward at such a rate that when we got to the our team got to the place where we were supposed to, they'd already moved, and we couldn't, there was no way for a small group of people to catch up with whoever the division was that I was assigned to. So I was sent back, and we all went back, and and they transferred me here and transferred there, and ultimately then in the summer the atomic bomb was dropped and the war was over, and they demobilized me. So
I see. So then you went back to City College, or what?
Again, I didn't.
Minimal change.
Minimal change. By this time, my father had gotten a job in St. Louis, and my family no longer lived in New York. So I couldn't go back to City College because you have to be a resident to go. So I called up a guy whom I knew at City College, a dean, and he said to me, why don't you go to the University of Chicago? It's now, this was, around Christmas, 45, and he said they have a quarter system, so you wouldn't have to wait till till September to go to school. You may be able to go sooner. I mean, again, minimal change, minimal move, you know. And that turned out to be very good. So I went to Chicago, and I was a student at the University of Chicago.
And of what?
Linguistics. I mean, I was studying Russian.
Ah, Russian.
Yeah. Do you know Bobrinsky?
Yeah, about the name. I never met him. But
Okay, so you know, was in your department.
Yeah, right.
Are you still up there on the top floor and whatever the hall was?
No, it's a different place, and it's in the process of moving, but it's not in the same place that it was back.
I've not forgotten the name of the building.
It might have been in Foster, but it was at the time.
No. Okay.
That's as far back as I can trace.
Yeah, okay. It was up on the top floor. So I was in the linguistics department.
So who was in the linguistics department then?
Well, mainly Bobrinsky, who was a professor of Sanskrit, who wasn't really a linguist, you know.
Yeah.
And at some point they'd had, I think, I've now forgotten. They had some better people than Bobrinsky. Bobrinsky was now I don't know if you know anything about him. Bobrinsky was a Russian. In fact, he was a descendant of Catherine's. The first Bobrinsky was an illegitimate son of Catherine's. You know. And she had, you know, many lovers and so on. And one of the lovers produced one of a baby, and that was the Graf Bobrinsky. And then there was a family, a noble family in Russia, the Bobrinskys, and the Chicago professor was a descendant of that Bobrinsky. And I think his children still live in Chicago. You might look in the telephone directory, see if you probably find a telephone number for them. As I remember, they were there. Okay, he was a professor. Yeah, and then the next summer, a linguist came to the department as a visiting professor. And his name was, he was an Italian, Bonfante was his name.
Oh, yeah.
Giuliano Bonfante. He ended up he lived very long. I mean, he died, maybe just 10 years ago. I mean, he was very old when he died. But anyway, he was a professor, and he came, and I was a graduate student in the department, and I'd hang around the department. And so he and I got to be social friends. And then one day, I remember going out to dinner with him, and he said to me, "Why do you study at Chicago, you know, in linguistics?" He said, "that it's not the right place to study Slavic." He said the professor there was a guy by the name of Francis Whitfield. I don't know if you know, as you can see, he never made a name for himself. And he said, "You're making a big mistake hanging out here." So I said to him, "Well, what's your suggestion?" He said, "Well, if you're a Slavicist," he says, "there's only one guy to study with, and that's Jacobson at Columbia. So you go to Columbia, and I'll write them a letter, and maybe they'll let you in." Or he didn't. He said he was more positive than that. So Christmas time, I went to Chicago and to Columbia, and I applied there, you know, and they accepted me. See, in those days it was very easy. You had the GI Bill, so your tuition was paid. And, you know, it wasn't any. Practically all you had to do is say you want to come, and I had good enough grades to come. So
What was the first time you saw Jakobson? Was it a big class?
So the first time I saw Jakobson, I didn't know it until later. He had a girlfriend with whom he was living in the country, and he wasn't. I mean, he was married and he had a wife and all that, but he was out with his girlfriend, and he wasn't available, so I never saw him. And the first term, I never saw him. But then, at the end of the first term, he was punished, and very severely. He was going to go with his girlfriend. His girlfriend had a house near Vassar College, upstate, in New York State, near Poughkeepsie, and they were going to go and see a Shakespeare play that was being performed at Vassar. And while they were waiting for the cab to come, some drunk drove by, and it was snowing, and he ran over a Roman and broke both. He had double compound fractures on both legs. He didn't walk for a year.
Wow.
After that. And I remember I sort of taught him how to walk after he came back. So first time I saw him, he was at medical, up there on 168th Street. He was in the room, and he asked me later on, he was a great movie buff, and he said, did you, there was a movie about Hearst.
Citizen Kane.
Yeah. Citizen Kane. Do you remember Citizen Kane? And you remember there was a guy, they had an interview with sort of an elderly guy who talked about Kane, into his memories. And he said, and he was in the hospital, and he said, that was the same hospital I was in. Roman is a movie star, and so.
We have to at some point get to the story where he says, but more people came to my talk. You had this story about Jakobson in Paris, and he tells you about he gave a lecture.
Yeah.
I don't mean to stop you. It's just
very similar. I've forgotten now the story, but I remember where he said somebody gave a lecture in Paris. But he said, but there are many more people at my lecture than I don't know who he said that about, but that was typical of Roman.
So, did you write a thesis with him then?
Sure.
What was it about, your thesis?
It was a terrible thesis. A wrong thing I should know. It was about, I don't even remember now the title of my thesis, to tell you the truth. It was so bad. I thought it was really a completely useless kind of thesis where I examined spellings or something like this, and it was completely useless kind of thesis. I would never have allowed anybody to write a thesis like that, such as I did. Well, anyway, I got my thesis. I didn't finish my thesis till 1955, by which time I already had a job. I came here, and I needed a job. My GI Bill wasn't going to last forever, so I needed a job, and there was that job teaching German and Russian there was a job teaching Russian at MIT. And I went to interview for the job, and the other guy, I was competing with another guy who could only do Russian, but then I said that I do German, and at a pinch also French. Obviously they gave me the job, and not him, and I've been here ever since.
Didn't you ask for more money or something? You told me a story when I went out on the job market myself, and
Yeah.
of which the punchline was
Yeah.
l'audace de l'audace et toujours de l'audace. La France sera sauvée.
Well, that's Danton said that.
Yes, and I thought
Yeah,
you
yeah.
set it up yourself.
Yeah. But I said I did ask. What happened? I did ask for they offered me an assistant professor, no, instructorship at 4,000. So I said I said I was happy to have an instructorship, but I wanted more money. And then I didn't hear, I didn't hear for quite a long time. Nobody said anything. And it was Christmas, and I went home to St. Louis to visit my parents, and I told my father, should I go back and say that I'll come for less? And he said, no. He says, you played your, now just wait. And about, in the new year, shortly after the beginning of the new year, whoever it was called me from MIT and said that I would be assistant professor at 4,500. So I got an very.
Was it William Locke who was head of the department at that time?
No. Bill Locke.
Yeah, Bill Locke. Yeah.
Bill Locke.
Yeah.
He was the head here. Yeah, he then became head of the
Libraries.
MIT library. Yeah, he retired as head.
So, 51.
This is 54.
55.
51.
51.
Yeah, I was hired here 51.
Oh, okay.
51. And when did you write, you, Font, and Jakobsen,
We did it
fundamentals? When was that?
1952.
52.
Yeah.
I see.
Right there, that was the first thing that I did, as I participated in. See, Jakobsen had the incorrect idea that the features were not articulatory, but they were auditory, and that you had to, the acoustic record sort of made it was more easily interpreted in terms of features than the articulatory. And he and I and Font, this Swedish acoustician, wrote. I mean, he wrote, and Font and I more or less commented on what he wrote, and and put the manuscript in order, and that was called Preliminaries to Speech Analysis. And the idea was that to show that the linguistic categories that linguists knew about were more obvious acoustically. Well, in retrospect, they neither. I mean, it's not but that's what we thought at the time.
And then you and Jakobsen, you wrote that small book in
Yeah.
What was it? Fundamentals of Speech.
Fundamentals of Language.
Fundamentals of Language, which is,
Which basically repeated the same argument.
Yeah. And so, I was wondering, do you remember when you first heard of the existence of linguistics? Who said the word linguistics to you?
Well, right around. I mean, probably while I was a student at Chicago.
At Chicago.
Yeah. Because, Sapir had been at Chicago at one point, and then he went to Yale.
Right. He left in 29, died in 39. He left Chicago in 29 and died in 39.
Yeah, okay, but after he died, they offered the position to Bloomfield.
Yeah.
And as you know, that was a very tragic, for Bloomfield, he should never have taken his wife, had been perfectly happy in Chicago when she got Bloomfield was moved from Chicago to Yale
Yeah.
after Superior died. And he accepted the job at Yale. And you know, as I understand, Hutchins urged him, you know, you have to go to Yale. Hutchins had been at Yale, and you know, it's wonderful, and you should go. And he didn't want to go, and he didn't have the sort of the strength of character to look his president in the eye and say, I don't want to go. And so he didn't. He went to, meekly went to Yale, and when he got to Yale, his wife got sick, and he had to take care of her, and then he got sick, and it was a very bad move for him. It was just a terrible move for him. He should have stayed in Chicago. He'd had a happier life and much less trouble, but he didn't. And
So, and would Jakobson have said that he was primarily a phonologist or not? He just say any kind of linguistics?
yeah,
was
but he was,
interested in?
but you know, phonology was a field that he and Trubetskoy had worked in,
Right,
and you know, and then there appeared Trubetskoy's book, which was published in 1939, as you probably know, and was just before, and that was after Trubetskoy had died. Trubetskoy died in the summer of 1938. You know, shortly, you know, Trubetskoy was professor in Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
And Roman was professor in Brno in Czechoslovakia, which wasn't very far apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would see each other and so on. And then, of course, the Nazis came in 1939. First Austria was taken over in 1938, and then in 1939 the Nazis occupied Czechoslovakia and so on. And Jakobson decided to leave, very smart, and what he did is he simply got on a train and bought a ticket to go, as he told me, he didn't buy a ticket ahead of time, he bought a ticket at the station to go to Denmark.
Norway, wasn't it? Norway?
No, he first went to Denmark,
Mm-hmm.
and then he went to Norway.
Mm-hmm.
But then in 1940, the Germans attacked both Denmark and, you know, and they overran him. So he escaped from from Norway to Sweden, and he was in Sweden, where he wrote Kindersprache was written in Uppsala, and then he got it. Somehow his brother was in America. He had a brother, Sergei, who was later on in the Library or something in the Library of Congress, and Sergei arranged for him to come to America. And Roman arrived here in the summer of 1941, and and he couldn't get a job for a long time. And then he got a job at Columbia. This guy Simmons gave him a job at Columbia, and Roman. Do you know a guy named Bill Edgerton? Did you ever know anybody who was at Indiana?
No, I didn't know.
Okay. Anyway, Bill Edgerton was around at that time. So Roman became professor at Columbia, but he didn't get along with Simmons.
Do Do you want to say anything about Ramon's relations with the Broadway, with the American linguists who were working for the Defense Department on Broadway?
Oh, yeah. Well, there was this project. I've not forgotten who was in it.
Defense.
It was a
Language,
I mean a language project, and I think they were preparing these textbooks that later on were published as Spoken X. You know, there was a whole group of them. Traeger was working there and so on, and they were very unfriendly to Ramon. You know, and Ramon really, they wouldn't have anything to do with him. And, you know, Hackett in particular was very unfriendly at the time. And then he regretted it very much afterwards. He told me afterwards that he was very, very sorry that he'd been so, you know, but they were all of them were there, and they were, I mean, a group, and they regarded both intellectually and personally, they didn't like Ramon. Ramon had a hard time with them. But Ramon made his way.
Yeah.
You know.
So, I guess, wouldn't it be true to say that in the 30s and the 20s, you know, was it not the case that Prague was the center of the linguistic world?
In the 30s.
In the 30s.
In the 30s, it had become because they had established what they call the Prague Linguistic Circle.
Right. And then, and
Ramon was, and Trubetskoy were crucial
Right.
in establishing the Prague Linguistic Circle. And their interest was, in those days, in phonology.
but really, that was the theoretical linguistics, right?
In those days, yes.
Because there wasn't syntax around, and
No.
and
Absolutely.
so if you were going to do serious work in linguistics, you would be a phonologist, right?
More or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the action was.
Yeah.
There's very little syntax in those days.
Yeah.
I mean, Harris was the one who began,
Yeah.
but he also started with phonology.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, but Harris was the one who, and that's how Noam got to be in the syntax. You know.
You have to tell us about how you met Noam. How did you meet Noam? Noam Chomsky. Yeah, I mean, because you
He
were...
came here. He became a junior fellow here.
Yeah, so what was it like the first time you met him?
What did I tell you? I don't remember what I told you.
I don't think you did. So,
Oh,
what
what happened was Noam was a junior fellow, and he used to come to Jakobsen's lectures, and I used to attend the Jakobsen's lectures in those days. It was natural for
was
him
he at Harvard? Was
Yeah,
Jakobsen at Harvard?
Yeah, Jakobsen was at Harvard. Yeah,
I see.
Jakobsen wasn't at MIT.
I see.
Jakobsen
right.
was at Harvard.
Okay.
And I used to go to Jakobsen's lectures at Harvard. And that's how I got to know. Carol got a job in Arley as a phonetician. She knew, I've not forgotten this Frenchman. He was a French linguist from Chicago. He was in Philadelphia. I've not forgotten. She knew him, and he knew Locke, and you know how you get jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, you've experienced it. I mean, your own and your students, and you know so and so, and then you go in and you talk, and you persuade the person to give you a job. You know, that's so. Anyway, I ended up at MIT. By that time ended up at MIT, and Jakobsen was at Harvard,
Right.
and I used to go to Jakobsen's lectures, always.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, I used to go and various people would come there, and you know, and he was a well-known linguist, so people would come and go listen to his lectures.
And then, how did you realize that you and Noam would start working together? How did...
Oh,
It was about discovery procedures, wasn't it? Because Noam believed that.
The first intellectual argument I won was Noam, and that was also the only one. But it was very early, so it made a big impression on him. He did want to discuss. Well, like all of linguistics at that time, he conceived of a linguistic description as going from the data automatically to the abstract representation. There was a very strong relation between the data and the representation, you know. And I sort of persuaded him. I don't know what I don't remember what my argument was. That was. I mean, there was nothing that I think I said. Imagine in physics or in chemistry how you would go from meter readings to the idea that there are atoms.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not all that obvious, you know. And why should linguistics insist on this obviousness?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it wasn't a big argument, but it was sort of an obvious argument linguistics was really far out. I mean, he'd never thought about it, you know. And once I got him to think about it, I realized that was totally untenable view, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you could compute your way from the data to this theory. I mean, there was just an odd view, and I remember once it hit it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that you should have an algorithm to figure out to develop a science. You know. How could you possibly? I mean, once you say it, it's already completely stupid, you know.
So meeting you and talking with you and having this argument, in a sense, liberated him from blinders, in effect,
from Harris.
Yeah.
I mean, that was that was precisely what. I mean, you know, a lot of stuff that Harris had was still valid, you know, but the fundamental proposition in Harris, namely that you should have a very strong relation between the data and the theory, and that, you know, made everything possible. And that's why we wrote what we wrote, you know, and ultimately we wrote Sound Pattern, but it took us 12 years to write.